Well, this is a pleasant surprise. I honestly regret a little bit putting that pleasant surprise business right up front because now I'm kind of at a loss for exactly what to say for the rest of this review. Rough Night is a pretty damn good little movie. It's also a pretty damn good mainstream comedy, and as some of you may have heard me mention before, a good mainstream comedy is the hottest type of movie to properly critique. See, those indie comedies are easier to review because there's usually some kind of edgy subject matter or quirky premise that you can at least talk about without giving away all the good jokes, so it's easy to explain why they're good or not good. And a bad mainstream comedy is super easy to criticize because you can explain exactly why all the jokes aren't funny because you're not worried about spoiling them because they're bad jokes. But a good mainstream comedy is usually a very basic, broad premise that lives or dies based on telling a lot of great jokes. And if you tell people the jokes, you're kind of guaranteeing they won't get as much out of them as you did. I mean, think about your favorite funny movie. You got it? Okay, now try and imagine how you would explain why you like it so much at length without describing any of the funny parts. Don't worry, I'll wait. It's hard, right? But they're paying me for this, so if you take anything away from this review of Rough Night other than Rough Night, it's pretty funny, it should be that the trailers are doing this movie a disservice. From the ads, you might get the notion that this is an ultra-vulgar mashup of The Hangover and Very Bad Things, but gender-flipped with female leads in order to create a Bridesmaids clone. And while that description sort of fits, it's really off on a whole other kick all its own, aiming more for a kind of hybrid, upscale, lowbrow humor that characterized a lot of the later Blake Edwards comedies, with a zany, quick-witted screwball tone reminiscent of writer-director Lucia Aniello's contributions to Broad City that's about as far removed from Paul Feig's leisurely improvisational feel-goodism as you can get without actually becoming a torrent of sleazebag nihilism like Very Bad Things, come to think of it. Also, I feel like a few of the more problematic story points raised by the trailers are addressed and subverted with a bit more nuance in the actual story, but that would be talking spoilers, so yeah, judge that one for yourself. Alright, so the premise here is that Scarlett Johansson, Ilana Glazer, Jillian Bell, and Zoe Kravitz are a group of now grown-up college best friends reuniting for Johansson's bachelorette party in Florida along with Kate McKinnon as her relative newcomer buddy from Australia. Through a series of misunderstandings and complications, a male exotic dancer winds up accidentally dead in the house they're staying at, and through even more complications and misunderstandings, they wind up making themselves all look very, very guilty of manslaughter. And as they all have various reasons beyond the obvious of not wanting to be in prison for this, they resolve to dispose of the body and cover up the whole incident, which spirals out into even more misunderstandings and complications. And that is pretty much it. What happens is, for the most part, really funny and features both sharp, clever, screwball dialogue-driven scenes and some really good physical comedy as well. I'd tell you what those scenes all are, but like I said, that's why these are tough to review. What I can say is that I think it takes it up to the next level compared to other comedies of this type through a lot of little details, many of which I think you can attribute to the extra insight provided by having a woman direct and co-write a movie primarily about women. The relationships all feel realistic and well observed, the inter-character dialogue flows naturalistically, and the characters, Johansson as a sort of uptight workaholic, Bell as the clingy, insecure bestie, Glazer as a crunchy, free-spirited activist, Kravitz as the slick career woman, and Kate McKinnon as, wacky human cartoon Kate McKinnon character, but Australian this time, all deftly avoid tripping over from archetype into stereotype. For example, despite the way the trailers have framed the context of a few of the physical comedy gags in particular, the unfortunately expected torrent of jokes at the expense of Jillian Bell as the larger proportion member of the group don't really materialize the way you'd expect them to in another movie. Instead, it's all about her being overexcitable. There's a few spots where you could argue that they take the low road anyway, but that was the impression I got at least. See, also, Kravitz and Glazer's characters are introduced as originally having been a couple in college who, obvious to everyone but them, are still clearly crazy in love with one another, even though Kravitz is now married with children. But while the passive-aggressive flirting is played for laughs, it's also played sentimentally and with a notable absence of leering or fetishizing their same-sex relationship. Although there's a side plot involving an oversexed swinger couple next door who are a little too fixated on Zoe Kravitz that maybe crosses a line on that front. There's also a whole subplot involving Paul W. Downs, who is Aniello's husband and plays Trey on Broad City, as Johansson's fiancé, who, you guessed it, after a series of misunderstandings and complications, finds himself erroneously convinced that she's breaking off their engagement and races to Florida to reconcile. And, well, I shouldn't spoil any of his business because he very nearly walks away with the movie, but I will say that it's the first time I've seen a comedy get a laugh by juxtaposing women being rowdy with men being surprisingly sophisticated and sensitive, without feeling like it's mocking the men for that fact. It's interesting. On a similar note, I don't know that I've ever seen a wacky caper screwball comedy patch over the necessary why not just call the police plot hole with because women and people of color can't necessarily trust the police, but not only does this movie go there, it's played as one of the handful of realistic, serious business beats. Now, I'm not going to go calling this a classic, but it's funny, agreeably original, and makes a lot of smart, unexpected choices. 3 stars, very much worth a look.